Okay, so now that Granddaddy's not here, just can you tell us what you know about his childhood and his family?
Well, Granddaddy grew up under, you had choices, and his father made more ambitious choices than my granddaddy did. Mr. Owens had had a hard time that the three brothers had left home. So he had had lots of difficulties in his growing up years. And he and grandmother, right after they married, had bought um, land of some kind. They lost land anyway on foreclosure, and it left a really bitter taste in Granddaddy's mouth. It influenced his thinking a lot. So aim in life was to buy a farm. He found this farm in Delta County, 50 acres. You couldn't live and work on 50 acres. It just wasn't big enough. But they bought it, and Granddaddy wanted that farm, and he wanted his children and grandchildren to have it. Hard to pay for a farm. My granddaddy never even tried. He rented, which meant you never owned anything. Mr. Owens worked so hard to buy that farm, and he did, even though it was only 50 acres. But he worked, paid it off, but they did a lot of doing without. Granddaddy actually had it harder than I did. Well, we could have money. We didn't have to make the house payment. The house came with the land being rented. You didn't pay for it at all. That was, if you rented a land, there were two ways of renting. You could rent what they call on the house, which meant everything you made off that land, you got half of, and the owner got half. Or you rented it on the third and fourth, which meant if you got a third of whatever you made off of that land, and the owner got a fourth. But you didn't have to pay any house rent. You didn't have running water, so you didn't have a water bill. You didn't have electricity, so you didn't have electricity bill. So living there was very cheap, very much so. Now in Mr. Owens' case, he had to pay for that land no matter what, with very little resources to do it. But he managed to do it. But it meant their family lived with a whole lot less even than we did. And Mr. Owens had several children. It was not unusual during that time, though, for families, two or three families to live together, because that's the only way you could pay your bills and manage it all. So with Mr. Owens, they had how many children? Earl and Hubert, and Mary and Mildred Larbell had 5 children. That was a lot of kids to raise, and no money came in. But they lived on it. They never had a car until after Earl grew up and went into the Navy and sent money home to buy a car. So they went everywhere by wagon. They had, like I say, even less than we did. We had a car long before they did. So it was just two different ways of ambition and what you wanted to do. But Granddaddy was very close to his father, inseparable almost. Everywhere Mr. Owens went, Hubert was right close by.
So was Granddaddy's parents upset when y'all got married just as a piece?
Yeah.
Or was that
Well,
a normal
Granddaddy
thing?
was glad, but grandmother, she really, and she told me about it. I didn't have to guess about it. And you got to remember, during that time, when you had a child out of wedlock, you were stamped bad from then on, even though you had, even the child, you had nothing to do with that. Grandmother very real strongly about that, and she did not want Daddy to marry me because I came from a child out of wedlock. And today, they don't think anything about that. But I can tell you, somewhere along the line, I think those children will feel some sense of reproach about that. but not like when I was growing up. And you know what's so funny? Granddaddy knew about that before I did.
Hmm.
And that I didn't know I didn't have a father. So, wasn't a big deal to me. And I didn't know why grandmother didn't like me till after we married, before I found that out. But if she knew Daddy was coming to get me or date me, she would let him have a car.
What did they farm on their farm? Like, what crops? Was it crops or was it cattle? Or
No, they didn't really have any cattle. They didn't have enough land today. It's mostly cotton and corn. And had a garden.
and this was in Cooper, Texas, is where he grew up.
Hmm.
He grew up in Cooper, Texas.
And Needmore.
Needmore.
Needmore. But the nearest town and the county seat was Cooper. Now their place was just a very short distance from where Dora grew up. She lived in the same area and spent lots of times at Mr. and Miss Owens' house. I can see how Miss Owens really liked her because she was there a lot. And her family, Dora's family came from a pretty wealthy. It wouldn't be wealthy by today's standards, but by the standards then it would have been. Miss Owens made money. I mean, Miss Miller made money as a school teacher. And Rudolph Miller they had a big ranch.
That's yours.
You said that there were a lot of things that influenced Granddaddy when he was growing up, influenced the way he thought about things. So what were some of the lessons that he learned growing up that he carried on as a father and a husband raising his family?
His sense of, he was always busy. It always bothered him for laziness. He never was. And Mr. Owens, he was that way with his children. They all were hard-working kids. None of them were. Granddaddy had to earn his own money for clothes to go to school. And the way he did that, the only extra money, if you worked for yourself on the farm, you did your work. Okay, if you could hire out to a neighbor, you could earn a little extra money. Well, the way most of that was, by the time that came, most of the cotton had been picked. Well, there was, you called it scrapping. As you pick cotton, especially people that want to pick fast, you didn't clean all of that cotton out of that bowl. So you would scrap, which meant you go back and you pick. And it ruined your hand. I mean, your hands were picked to death trying to put that little bit of cotton back out of that bowl. When you did that, that's what Daddy did to earn his school clothes. Is scrapping, which was tedious, hard work, very little. But all you bought was maybe a couple of pair of overalls, a shirt, undershirt, or something wrong with it. That influenced him a lot in how to manage money and save it and make it go a long way. And it was a good lesson, and he was good at it, very good at it. And I was too, because you never threw things away. You saved some of that, whatever you had to save, because you didn't know what was going to happen next year. Everything depended on weather. You had no control over whether that crop was going to turn out good or not. Only the weather, only God could control that. So you couldn't rely. If you had like a job that you have and you go to work every day and you know what your income's going to be, it's not that way on the farm. There were years when you'd have a drought or something. People nearly starved to death. But in the middle of that, I don't remember the robberies and the fights and the break-ins that we have today. We never even locked our doors. But you talk about being desperate for money and food, it was everywhere, everywhere.
You talked earlier about hobos coming off the railroad near your house and feeding them when they come by. Any fears that they would rob you back then, or that just wasn't really?
Never even entered our mind.
Yeah.
It was just, you take it for granted.
And they were grateful. And
Absolutely. They were there, not by choice, but they didn't want anything for them to do. And as your dad has found out from doing genealogy, it wasn't too unusual for a man with a family just to walk off and you never hear from them again. They'd go looking for anything, and if they couldn't find them, they didn't come back home. And they were ashamed. I can remember. I only remember one time. We went, if you were poor and you had to wait for the handout the government gave you, in our town, you went in front of the fire station. Now, it'd be different places at different towns, but ours was in front of that fire station. The day of the week, once a month, that truck or whatever, train, whatever was bringing these supplies in, would come in, and people would line up, and they would be lined up from the front of that fire station to the street. They got flour and sugar and cornmeal and shortening. Oatmeal sometimes. Whatever was in abundance. They took, like you had surplus of certain things. That's what they gave to the people to live on. That was the saddest looking group of people you ever saw in your life. One time we had to do that. I remember this aunt that gave Daddy more trouble walked off and left, which she did a lot of times. She had 3 children. And she would just disappear for days and leave those kids down there hungry. The oldest girl, when after 2 or 3 days had passed, she would bring them to our house. Well, we already had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people living there. That was a big family to feed. I remember one time they came, and it was just about time to plant the cotton, which meant that's once a year. You went to the bank and you borrowed money for your cotton seed. During that time, that was the leanest time of the whole year. You didn't have anything coming in, and a lot needed to go out. Well, it was during that time when Janice came and brought those 3 children. They hadn't eaten in days. They were so hungry. And so Mama took whatever we had and fed them. Well, that took our last flour and sugar, whatever have you. So Daddy decided that he had to go get in line for that food stuff. I never saw him cry but that one time. But he took me with him, and we were standing in line, and I looked up and I saw the tears running down Daddy's eyes. Only time I ever saw him cry in my life. That's a very humiliating time for a man who wants to work, always worked and made a living, and suddenly there's nothing there. And he was not, that wasn't an unusual thing at all. So see how blessed people are today with all they have. During those years, it would have been unimaginable. Never dreamed. I can remember going to, we called the movie the Shoot 'em Up, all Western. And they used to have a thing that every Saturday it was like Flash Gordon. And they showed pictures on that of what was to come, and it showed overpasses like we have today, overpasses. To us, why, that'll never happen. They can't do that. And today I can see that. I've seen that on a movie screen 50 years ago.
So Granddaddy was district governor for Rotary, and he ran for the school board in Irving. I remember that. What are some of the other things he did?
Ooh,
Well, he was president of Civic Savings.
Well, one of the first things I remember he did, he and a man by the name of Joe Vardaman was selected somehow, and I don't remember how that came about. But they had a real need for helping disabled children. And Daddy and Joe Vardaman headed up that campaign. And they raised money to do that. They worked a whole year with the city to do that. Well, after that, he served on the parks department. Whoever got that little, there was a planter the last time when everybody took something and had Daddy's name on it. Do you know who took it?
I think it might be Elaine.
Well, whoever took that, when Daddy retired from the parks board, he worked on that 2 years. And they worked. I mean, it's not a job you just attend and forget about. They gave him that planter and they had put his name on it. They did all of the corners of decoration. They set all of the activities of the parks and recreation centers. In fact, several of those recreation centers was built when he was on the school board. And I can't remember.
He went to Cuba. Didn't he go to Cuba?
This was, yeah, he served a time on, they call it, I think it's Baptist Men. It was Baptist Men when he was on it. And every time they had a disaster anywhere, they went. And he had just bought that 1976 Chevrolet. When that, what was it called when it hit Galveston?
Hurricane.
Do you remember the hurricane that just literally destroyed the...
Alicia was 83.
What year was it?
It's 1976.
I only know the one from 1900.
Yeah, 1900 is bad.
1900 was a big one.
Well,
I was 3 years
anyway,
old.
he went with Baptist Men, and that's when he was doing ham radio. And he was one of the radio men that contacted the rest of the world because all the lines were down. There was no communication. Wasn't any cell phones then. Wasn't such a thing as cell phone. You had to have a land phone. He was there for a while, and it's been so funny. That old pickup, the floorboard under where the brakes and everything was literally rotted out. He had that covered with some kind of cardboard or something to just keep from falling through there. That happened when that hurricane hit, and that he stayed by the beach shore where the strait is with that pickup, and that salt water rusted out that floorboard. It's kind of funny. He worked with them for several years. He went with them, well, they went several places, and they built seminaries and churches. They went to South American countries, but they went to Mexico, went to several South American countries, and built pastors' homes. They built boys' dormitories, but and he went to Cuba. They were in Cuba for 2 weeks. I can't remember what they built there. The last trip he made was to Mexico, and he came back. I never will forget. He was really down when he came back about that. He didn't talk to them much about it at first. But whatever they took, clothes-wise or anything, a bag, what have you, they never brought back. And they left it for those people to have. He came back, and then one night he sat down and was talking about we had a women's missionary built a school for girls. And Daddy, they bet you there. It's the